Hi everyone, welcome to the Literacy Teaching Toolkit English webinar. Lovely to see you all here tonight. Thank you for joining us. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we come to this meeting. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and thank them for taking care of this country over countless generations. My name is Narissa Leung. If you have not met me before, I'm an education consultant here in the wonderful state of Victoria. I currently facilitate some of Basto's leading literacies or literacy suite options. So I facilitate some of the leading literacy data assessment practice. My contact details are on the screen. I am at RisL on Twitter and I'm AusLit Teacher on all of the other pipes. So because I have an audience of English teachers today, I will tell you, if you on AusLit Teacher on Facebook and on my website auslitteacher.com.au, I do share mentor texts that primary and secondary teachers can use in their classrooms to teach reading and writing. So at the moment, I mainly share picture storybooks, but I try and share them across from foundation to year 10. So if you want to have a look at that, it's on AusLit Teacher. My email address is here. I will just make a point that I do not have an Edgemail account, so please do not email Narissa at Basto, because there actually is a Narissa that works here at Basto, and she does an excellent job of forwarding people's emails on. But if you want to get in contact with me, my email address is narissaleung@gmail.com. So lovely to have you here. If this is the first time you've attended one of these webinars via this format, I'll just let you know that I do not talk for the whole entire time. I try and get you to engage in conversation. And I've shared this quote here from this book, Academic Conversations, and I'll read it out to you because I think it's really important for our discussion tonight. Conversations are powerful teachers. They engage, motivate, and challenge. They help us build ideas, solve problems, and communicate our thoughts. They cause ideas to stick and grow in our minds. They strengthen our comprehension of new ideas. Why have I put this on here when obviously we're not in a room where we can have face-to-face conversations? It's because I wanted to introduce you to the back channel that we use to have those conversations in this forum. So hopefully you will have received the email already. Doesn't matter if you didn't. The link is on the screen there, padlet.com/basto/litteacheng, as in the start of English. And that's the place where we get to have these conversations, and where I would really like you to share your resources or your thoughts or any links, any aha moments or any questions. So put those in the chat, and we try and respond to those throughout the session. That is a place where you can engage in those conversations that deepen, that cause ideas to stick and grow in your minds, and that strengthen your comprehension of new ideas. Language is how we think, and that's why we always provide that option of the back channel. I can see some people introducing themselves in the back channel, so hello to all of the people who have already said a little hello in there and let us know where you're from. It's always nice to know that we have some real people on the end of this technology. So during the night, I usually would present some content. I always will ask you to put your thoughts in the chat as we're going anyway, but we will pause and I'll provide you some time to go back into the chat and share some of your thinking after we move through some of the content. Okay. So the understanding goals for tonight are that you'll understand the importance of explicit teaching of disciplinary literacy in the English classroom. And obviously we're going to talk about what is disciplinary literacy. Develop knowledge of a range of effective disciplinary literacy related teaching practices, and deepen your knowledge of the range of resources. So I can't possibly teach you everything you need to know about this in 1.5 hours. This really is just it's a tasting plate or a launching pad so that you can learn more about what's available and then go off and deepen your own knowledge later on. So the success criteria, I can describe reasons why explicit teaching of disciplinary literacy is important in the English classroom. It is incredibly difficult to say disciplinary literacy really quickly. I need to shorten it to something else. List a range of practical literacy-related activities for the English classroom. And I don't really like the word activities because I think it doesn't sound like it has the rigor, but we can discuss that later. Reflect on your current literacy-related teaching practices and list a range of supporting resources for ongoing learning. Because really what I want you to do is, after you've heard about what's available in the toolkit and we look at a couple of the practices, then I want you to think about later, what am I going to look at? What will I investigate further myself? So how are we going to do all of that? The agenda for tonight. So we're going to look at the what and why of disciplinary literacy. And this is a word that's starting to emerge a lot in secondary settings. So we need to work out, what is it? I'm going to introduce the Literacy Teaching Toolkit English to you. It's a big task introducing the toolkit to you, especially the English one, because there is so much on there. And probably the worst format is for me to stand here and say, click this now, click this now, click this. So I'm going to try my best to help you to better understand what is available on the toolkit, but I'm not going to click on every single page. So you will get a copy of the slides after tonight. So if you think I'm going a bit too quickly, or you want to go back and go back to a page that I described, then you'll get a copy of the slides after tonight. So you don't need to worry about that. We are then going to discuss talk in the English classroom. And what does the toolkit say about talk, and what is effective talk? And I'm not sure if we'll have time to get to writing, but I do want to talk about teaching practices. And I've picked out 2 teaching practices in particular. Okay, so let's get started. Now I do realise that some of you, and I'd love to know in the chat, what role you have in your school currently. So I understand some of you will be English teachers, some of you might be literacy leaders, and you might be tasked with introducing or building a culture of literacy across your school. So you're coming tonight to find out, when I'm working with the English teachers, what could I be saying to them to talk to them about the reading and writing practices and speaking listening practices in their classroom. So I am presenting with that in mind, that you might come from these different contexts. All right, so first of all, the what and the why of disciplinary literacy. Okay, so I've taken a couple of quotes. Some of these are directly from our toolkit. Firstly, given the distinct ways that different academic disciplines use language to make their own meanings, students need to develop differentiated literacy skills and strategies for interacting with the texts of each discipline. So this is a bit of a step away. In the past, we might have talked about that whole school literacy culture, and I think we went down a path of everyone has to teach the comprehension strategies in every discipline area. But recent research, or research sort of over the last 10 years, has suggested that actually in a secondary setting, we are better to look at the literacy that is specific to each of the disciplines, and that the literacy requirements in each of the disciplines are actually different. So yes, we will have comprehension strategies that we use across disciplines, but there are some specific practices and knowledge sets that we need around literacy for each separate discipline. Okay, so in thinking about that, it is no longer appropriate to talk about literacy across the curriculum. Instead, there is a need to delineate curriculum literacies, specifying the interface between a specific curriculum and its literacies, rather than imagining that there's a singular literacy that could be spread homogeneously across the curriculum. And for some of our schools, this might be a bit of a shift in thinking. And it's not to say that if you have engaged in that concept of literacy across the curriculum that, everything you've been doing is wrong. Absolutely not. It's to say that let's have a look at the latest research about what's effective in literacy practices in secondary school. And the shift now has been towards this idea of disciplinary literacy. Okay, so Disciplinary literacy refers to the learner's ability to read, write, and speak in ways that are valued and used by people in a given discipline. That is, to think like mathematicians, read like historians, and write like scientists. And I think part of this is, especially if you're working with teachers from other disciplines other than English, we're not asking these teachers to know everything there is to know about teaching English. We are saying to these science teachers or these maths teachers that you know your discipline well, you know it better than anyone else. So you are an experienced at reading and writing in that discipline, and that's the knowledge that you need to share with your students. Okay, so on the literacy teaching toolkit, there are 3 dot points underneath disciplinary literacy. I'm just going to read each of these, and we're going to have a little zoom in to the top one. So in disciplinary literacy, it recognises that literate strategies differ across the disciplines, and that's what we've just been talking about. And I think if you are a literacy leader in a school, and if you're tasked with building a culture of literacy across the school, the more you can understand about what the different strategies are that are required in each of the disciplines, the better you'll be able to support teachers in other content areas. Disciplinary literacy means that literate strategies and discipline-specific content are intertwined. So it's not that, especially for our science or our humanities teachers, it's not that I have all this content that I need to get through and now I've got to teach all this literacy stuff on top of it. It's actually while I'm interacting with texts for this discipline, I'm giving you the strategies that effective readers in a maths and English or humanities field use to extract the most information from these texts. And the 3rd dot point, it enables students to develop their content knowledge, skills and understanding to become experts within a discipline. So what Shanahan are saying is that time invested in building the capacity of students to read and write in those specific disciplines is time well spent, because in the long run, it actually builds the students' content knowledge, skills and understanding within that discipline. It's not that we're doing the work of the English teacher or the literacy teacher. It's that when I want my students to interact with a text in science or maths or humanities or whatever it is, or PE, I need them to know how best to interact with that text. Okay, so let's have a look at that first dot point in more detail, that idea that literate strategies differ across the disciplines. So if you came to the science webinar a couple of weeks ago, you'll be familiar with this slide. If not, that's okay, I'm going to just explain it. What I've done here is I've separated, or I've put the focus, I guess, for what students would be focusing on if we're teaching in an English classroom. What does reading look like? What's the skills and the knowledge that students need, as opposed to a science classroom, for example. The reason that I've put these two side by side is I want to show how that idea that the literate strategies differ across the disciplines. So what would I need to be teaching in an English classroom that might be different to what a teacher might be needing to teach in a science classroom, okay? So for example, let's start with science and then we can go backwards to English. So in a science classroom, for reading, we need students to understand that when they're reading, they assume an objective stance. So they know that what they're reading is going to not usually be a non-fiction text that has a very objective stance. When they're reading, they'll ask why and how more than they will ask what. They'll rely on data, sketches, charts, and illustrations a lot. That's not to say that you're not going to do that in English or maths, but specifically in science, these are some of the practices our students need to get their head around. They'll make connections from known to new concepts as they're reading. They'll determine the validity of sources and the quality of the evidence, and that's a part of reading in a science, in the world of science. So how valid is this source of information that's being presented? And is this evidence, how valid is it and how do I know? So they're always sort of critiquing, sort of come with that mindset. They will recognise the importance of precise scientific vocabulary. So that doesn't mean we don't talk about vocabulary in any other discipline, but in science, we might be talking about the Latin and Greek word families that help us to unpack some of the scientific vocabulary. Or we understand that when we're reading, there's this really specific science vocab, so that when we're writing, we have to write with that same scientific and precise vocabulary. And they might be reading with looking for details and evidence. If we flip over to the English classroom, some of the things, obviously it's not a comprehensive list, our students will be finding meaning through literary techniques when they're reading. They'll be identifying themes, especially if they're engaging in reading fiction and novels. They'll be recognising any bias that might exist in the texts, summarising, synthesising, analysing and evaluating, making connections. The connections won't necessarily be the same as the connections that they're making in a science classroom, where they're connecting known to new. The connections that we're making in English classroom might be those text-to-text, text-to-self, text-to-world connections, those types of connections. When they're reading, they'll be paying attention to the craft of reading, because we're always thinking, how can we use this to learn how to be a better writer? So, when we read a sentence, we think, oh, wow, really like that sentence. And we can start to turn on our writer's brain and think, what has the author done there? And what can I learn from that to craft my own really effective sentences? And recognising the elements of stories, poems and novels, because they're probably the main texts that we're going to be exposed to, or some of the texts that we're going to be exposed to. So when we're writing in these disciplines in science, we're using precise wording, we're favouring the passive voice, which could be very different to the writing that we're doing in the English classroom. In science, we're seeking exactness over craft. So it's not so much about, I really want to engage my reader when I'm writing in science. I need to inform the reader with the most precise information. Whereas in English, when our students are writing in English, their purpose might be more about engaging the reader. So two really different purposes for writing. In science, communicating in a systematic format, distinguishing facts from opinions, generating questions, all of those types of things. In the English classroom, we're looking at using the writing process. We're looking at flexible organisation, and not writing necessarily, or avoiding formulaic writing. Why? Because our reader will become disengaged if it's too formulaic. Whereas if you think about writing in science, we're writing up a report, there is a formula for that report, and that's what the reader comes to expect, that it'll be set out in a certain way. Our students, when they're writing in the English classroom, we might provide them with some frameworks to get them started with their writing. But ultimately, really strong writing is when the author has avoided using that formula, because it gives the reader a surprise and it keeps them interested. Looking at using credible evidence, employing literary devices and techniques appropriately. So in science, it is unlikely that we're going to be using things like alliteration, simile, metaphor, all of that. Whereas in the English classroom, that's the type of writer's craft that we're actually looking for. Two completely different purposes. And in English, I think this one's really important. We need to teach our students to adapt their writing for the audience. So when we're writing in an English classroom, we're thinking, who am I writing this for? And that affects our word choice. It affects how we structure the piece. It affects the length of the piece. All of those things. We've really got to consider our reader and adapt our writing to suit. In science, we don't do that. We don't sort of say, well, I'm going to write it for this person, so I'm going to need to change the report in this way. It's about conveying precise information. So when we're talking about disciplinary literacy or the literacy strategies that differ across the disciplines, I'm hoping that by putting these two things side by side, you can start to see some of the differences that we're talking about here, and why we can't have our science or our maths, humanities, PE, arts teachers saying that it is the job of the English teacher to teach everything our students need to know about literacy. Because if you're an English teacher, you might not necessarily be an expert in the field of science. So you're not exactly sure how scientists read or write and what are the skills and strategies that they use. but you do know how you read and write in the field of English. So you're an expert in that field, and it's really about helping our students to understand what goes on in the mind of a proficient reader and writer in your discipline. And hopefully that proficient person is you. Okay, so I'm hoping that this isn't new to everyone. This is the gradual release of responsibility. I like to put this up here because I think it needs to frame all of the work that we do with students. So this is Fisher and Fry's version of the gradual release of responsibility, the work from Pearson from, I think, back in the 80s. We can't expect our students to just know these discipline-specific reading and writing skills. We've got to take them through that gradual release of responsibility. Okay, so when we're talking about in the English classroom, when we're expecting our students to use writer's craft, we need to go through this process where we model it first, where we give our students opportunity to practice what we've modeled, and then, and only then, do our students go off and attempt to implement it independently. So too often we make assumptions that our students have these skills and we go straight down to independent practice. Really effective teaching, particularly in the English classroom, we've got to go back up and say, what's the modelling, what's the demonstration that I, as the proficient user of reading and writing in the English classroom, how have I built the skills? How have I demonstrated to the students exactly what I'm after? Okay, so part of this is that we ourselves need to become metacognitive, know what's going on in our own minds when we're reading a text. So if we're engaged in a novel, what's going on up here? What are the things that we're asking ourselves? What are the connections we're making? All of those types of things, and really being explicit with students about that. So not just reading the novel and moving on or answering some questions, but pulling right back and going, okay, this is what's going on up here for me. So we can model it, get students to have a go at it, maybe in pairs or in groups, before we send them off and expect them to do it independently. We're going to come back to this gradual release of responsibility later in tonight's session. I nearly called it a show. It's hardly a show in the session. So now what I want to do, just with that background of what is disciplinary literacy and what does it look like in the English classroom, I'm going to introduce you to the Literacy Teaching Toolkit. I would love to know, if you could put it in the chat, who has already visited the toolkit, who has never visited the toolkit, how much do you know about it? So I'd love you to put it in the chat. All answers are completely acceptable. We did have quite a few people at the Science Toolkit webinar a couple of weeks ago who'd never heard that there was a toolkit, and that's totally fine. That helps me to know where to go. So with this, okay, so just let me know in the chat about your experience. Have you had an opportunity to look through it? You've studied it every night before bed, or you just heard about it when you logged on tonight? That'd be great to know. So let's have a look at it. And I will remind you, this is, you're not going to know everything you need to know about the toolkit after tonight, but I'm hoping that you'll have a better understanding about what is available on the toolkit. So after the science session, I realised that I needed to back up a little bit and say an introduction. Firstly, welcome to the toolkit, the Literacy Teaching Toolkit. I didn't do that last time. I had an assumption that everyone knew that it was there. So the Literacy Teaching Toolkit, there are two parts to it. There's a primary part, Literacy Teaching Toolkit Primary, or F to 6, and there's a Literacy Teaching Toolkit 7 to 10, okay? So unlike, the difference is between the two, unlike the primary version, the secondary version is not laid out in terms of mode. What does that mean? In the primary version, if I want to know anything about reading, I can click on reading, and then all of the information about reading will appear. Same for writing, same for speaking, listening. In the secondary version, it's separated into content areas. And the why is because of all the reasons we've just talked about with disciplinary literacy, because reading will look different across each of the disciplines. So the thinking behind this is that you go into each of the discipline that you're interested in, and then get further information about the literacy practices specific to your discipline. Okay, I will say we are incredibly lucky to have this. I think this is the first of its kind in the world, and it's so refreshing for teachers in Victoria to have this backing to say this is what the department is suggesting about the teaching of literacy across primary and secondary school in our state. So I think, how exciting it is. And I know the secondary toolkit hasn't been out for a long time. The primary toolkit's been out for a couple of years now, and it's been incredibly valuable. So I'm really looking forward to secondary teachers sinking their teeth into it and finding out how it can help them with best practice in the literacy classroom. All right, so I see a few people have had a quick look through the literacy toolkit. Some people are brand new to it, and some people have been studying at school. Great. All people are welcome. Okay, so you can see this is the welcome page here. At the moment, we've got science, English and maths have been released, so they're available for people to access. We've got humanities, arts, technology and health and PE coming later in the year. So if you're in science, English and maths, then you're very lucky. You've already got access to all of this. If you're in any of those other areas, then you'll just need to sit on your hands and wait. But you could always go into the other areas just to have a little sticky beak. Today, obviously, we are going to focus on the literacy in English, okay? All right, so when you first go into the literacy in English page, you will have this format, and this is a similar format to each of the disciplines. So if you go onto the science one, you'll have these same 4 links on the first page. So the first link is the introduction. The second is always about developing understanding. The third is about communicating understanding. And the fourth is about pulling it all together. This is how each of the disciplines are separate. This is how they're all created. So when you go into the maths one, it'll be introduction, developing understanding, communicating understanding, and pulling it all together. So I'm hoping that as we step through each of these, you'll develop an understanding about what you'll find in each of these sections. So we're going to have a quick look at the first part, Introduction to Literacy in English, to see what's available in that section. Now, I'm not going to go into this section in great detail. I just want to point out that you go here, if you want to find out about what is literacy and what is English, this is your page to find that out. The role of language in English, selecting text in English, and literacy in the Victorian curriculum. This introduction page just provides a real overview of what are we talking about when we're saying literacy and English. What do those two things mean? What's the place of everything? Okay, so we go back to the main page. You'll know I'm back on the main page because I've put a big red box around it. So the intro is really just providing the background knowledge that you need to implement the rest of the work on the toolkit. Okay, so the next part we're going to look at is developing understanding. Now we're going to go into this one in a little bit more depth. This part, and to help you to understand how the toolkit's been laid out, the developing understanding part is really thinking about, say, if we're doing a unit of work, that first sort of part in the unit where we're building the knowledge of the students. So we're looking at that's what you'll find in developing understanding. Once we've built their knowledge, so we've been learning about a topic or whatever it is, a unit of work, we're building our knowledge, we're sort of all growing our understanding. And then when we flip over to now I want you to communicate your understanding with me, now that I've built your knowledge, now you've got to produce something or you've got to show what you know about this topic. That's when we go into the next layer, which is communicating understanding. Does that make sense? So that's what those two things mean: developing understanding, communicating understanding. So when we're looking at the developing understanding, we're thinking about what's the literacy skills that our students need when we're building their content knowledge around whatever it is that we're teaching them in English. Okay, what is it? So in here, there are 2 sections. The first one is texts in context. So interpreting, analysing and evaluating texts. And what are the literacy skills required by our students to be successful in interpreting, analysing and evaluating texts. And the second one is interacting with others. So when we're in that knowledge building part of our learning, what are the literacy skills our students need to interact with others. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in on the first one because it provides teachers with the knowledge that they need. What do our students need, and what are the teaching practices that we can engage in to teach that? All right, so there's two levels. There's the word and the sentence level, and then there's the paragraph level. Now, the word and the sentence level, looking at this in terms of how do our students make meaning at these levels, the word and the sentence level. So when the students are in the building knowledge part of teaching, and we're looking at things like conceptual vocabulary, connecting grammar and the text, modeling word solving. So how do our students, when they're coming up against vocabulary, unknown vocabulary in the English classroom, what are the skills and strategies that they can use to crack open the meaning of those words? So that's what we're looking at. That's what they're talking about in this part of the toolkit. So how can teachers help build student knowledge about effective use of grammar? This is the part of the toolkit that you can go into to find out. Word cards, so they provide some practical activities. At the bottom, there's always a references section, and I really recommend clicking on that because it usually links to other websites or other readings that are really valuable in terms of whatever it is the focus is, so the word and sentence level. Okay, so that's when we're building our knowledge. So how do we get our students to understand the word and the sentence level? The other level is the paragraph and the text level. So really here we're talking about comprehension strategies. How do our students understand what it is that they're reading? And you can see down the side there, you've got activating knowledge, annotating text, which is becoming really big in secondaries, concept mapping, close reading, decoding visual images, flow charting, guiding questions, initial field building, literal, inferential, and evaluative questions, all of those types of things, using model text to teach genre. So lots of really practical ideas and suggestions for teachers to understand how to teach this to students in the English classroom. So you can see over on the right-hand side, supporting students to get their knowledge ready for learning is an important stage in reading comprehension and links closely to the Victorian curriculum. Okay, so what is actually on the page though? I think that's what everyone's asking, and I'm sure you've probably got two screens open because you're having a little sticky beak. I'm going to show you some of the things that are available on the page. So let's have a look. So if we want to zoom in and say, okay, annotating text, that's what we want to work on. We're trying to build our student comprehension knowledge. So let's go in and see what are the resources available to teachers on the toolkit for this. So firstly, you usually get a summary of what it is. Sometimes you get links to the research around, so say annotating text. We've got here a little brief. English teachers often use annotations as a way to support students with their comprehension and to develop a closer reading of texts. And then we've got some idea, ask a question, look for the answer to the question, circle a word you don't understand, underline an important quote, etc. These are some of the things that we could be teaching our students. So I've pulled this straight from the toolkit on the paragraph level. A teaching model of how to annotate a text is an important step in building students' independence with their own reading and note-taking. So this goes back to that idea of gradual release of responsibility. Have we explicitly taught our students how to annotate text and why? How does it help me to be a better reader in the English classroom if I'm annotating texts using some of these ideas here, this give an opinion, look for clues? That's what our students really need to understand. The other resource that is underneath that annotating text is an example of an annotated text, which is great for English teachers to sit around and talk about, is this how we want our students to annotate our texts? What's our approach? What consistent message do we need to be telling our students? And are we modelling this for our students so they know exactly what we want from them when they do this? Why is it important? As a year 8 or year 9, whatever it is, English group, why do we believe annotating text is an important skill? How does it help our students to be successful in the English classroom? So part of that might be because it helps kids leave tracks of their thinking. It's good formative assessment for us because we have an idea of some of the metacognitive processes that are going on in their minds when they're reading that we might not otherwise have access to. It helps them when they can come back later to look and think, oh, yes, that's right. I was thinking that when I read that text. They can take these annotations to book discussions to then have discussions around the thing they're thinking that they had while they were reading the text. Lots of reasons. If our teachers don't understand the purpose, though, then this will be implemented in a really surface level way and by our students and our teachers. So we need consensus about why is annotating a really important part of the English classroom at our school. The other part in this section underneath annotating text is that there's a video to show this is what it looks like in a Victorian school. How exciting! Victorian videos, yes! Finally, we have our own videos. We don't need to look overseas for videos. And I will say that the videos that are currently on the secondary toolkit are really valuable. And we are going to watch this video, but a bit later on tonight. And we're going to look at it through a different lens. So that this is actually situated underneath the annotated text section, but we're going to look at it through a gradual release lens a bit later on. So not all of the sections have videos, unfortunately. I thought everyone would be really excited if they did. But the department team are adding more videos as they become available. So they recognise that the videos are really helpful for us in schools, and I think when you watch the video later, you'll see what I'm talking about. So you can see there are a variety of different supports and resources underneath each of those dot points on the pages, and each of them's different. So when you go into a different section, so I'm in the annotating text, you're not necessarily going to get the exact same resources or videos or whatever in the other sections. It's all different depending on what the focus is. Okay, let's go back. We're still in the developing understanding in English page, but now we're going to look at the interacting with others. So thinking about interacting with others, this is at when we're building our knowledge, all right? So this is when we're still learning in the learning part of our unit or whatever it is. So you can see here on this page, book discussions and independent reading, deconstructing speaking and listening skills, extending student responses with talk moves and exploratory talk, and talk strategies for group work. We're going to come back to talk later in the session tonight. But that's what's available in interacting with others. Okay, going back to the main page now. So we've looked at the introduction, the overview to the English and literacy. We've looked at the skills, the reading and writing skills that students will need when they're building their knowledge and developing their understanding in English. Now we've built our knowledge around a particular topic. We want our students to demonstrate their understanding. Okay, so now we're communicating understanding. We're in that phase where students are starting to show us what they know or what they've learned or what they're thinking around a text. Okay, so let's have a look at communicating our understanding in English. So this is set out in a similar way. There are two sections here: creating texts, interpreting, analysing and evaluating, and communicating and interacting with others. So this one, there's a bit more focus on writing here because we're communicating. Let's have a look at the first one. Here, we're looking at creating sentences. So we're at the word and sentence level here. Identifying key vocab, sentence starters, supporting student spelling, much needed. I think that could be a whole website just by itself. Using and editing punctuation and using feedback to increase the sophistication of student writing. So this section contains resources and knowledge for teachers to support students to improve the quality of their writing. And it's by starting at the word and the sentence level, okay? So if we have a look here, Rose and Martin, this is from the toolkit, said often the focus in classrooms is on producing whole texts. Does this sound familiar? However, it is important to give students explicit opportunity to pay attention to writing at the text, sentence and word levels. Now, I know we're not teaching towards NAPLAN, but I will say this is critical for a critical skill on the NAPLAN when students are engaging in the writing part of the NAPLAN. If you've had a look at the NAPLAN marking guide, when you're looking at the sentence level, so that ability to create complex sentences, it is one of the highest ranking scores on the NAPLAN marking guide. So we need to be paying attention to this word and sentence level. So alongside audience and spelling, I think it is, complex sentences, we're looking at a score out of 6, which is higher than the other areas in the marking guide. So that's just something to think about. This page has the resources that can help you to develop more effective sentences in student writing. And going back to what Rosa Martin said, sometimes we're too busy focused on creating the whole text. We need to just zoom in and teach really strong skills in those complex sentences and powerful words and sentences. As I said, there's also resources for spelling on here. Again, it needs its own website. But on here, there's some practical ideas and strategies that you can employ to build student content knowledge around the different knowledges that are required in spelling. So the phonology, the visual, the morphology, the etymology. What do any of those even mean? Got to go to the toolkit to have a look. And I would say for the spelling in particular, it is just a snapshot, just a little tasting plate. So go there, learn about the etymology, the morphology, the phonology, all of that, and then go to the references section and launch off and deepen your understanding and your knowledge about that part. At the paragraph and text level, so when our students are creating text, so when we're writing, resources for co-constructing texts, deconstructing arguments. And this is where reading and writing are strongly connected. So if we are asking our students to engage or to create a persuasive piece, for example, or a text that's persuading someone, we need to look at some examples. We need to pull them apart to see why it works or why it doesn't work. And then we need to be able to say, well, what can I learn from that I can apply over here in my own writing? So there's some resources on here for deconstructing texts, including some examples about how you could go about doing that. Reading journal, independent reading, critical. Structuring persuasive language analysis, selecting and incorporating evidence and quotes. That's something that sometimes we just assume our students have that knowledge. And using worked examples. We all know that one from the hits. So talking about mentor texts, what are the mentor texts that we could use? How do we even use them to build our student knowledge around really effective practice in writing? You can't write in the genre if you haven't read in it widely first. So going back to that gradual release, have we built their content knowledge around this genre before we've expected them to go down to independent practice and create their own text in that genre? So here's an example of a worked example of an introduction for an imaginative response text. And you can see the annotations and how this has been deconstructed with students. So they've got the circling there, and they've got, they've pulled it all apart so the students know what's gone into this piece, and that will help them to better construct a similar piece for their own writing. So stepping them through this deconstruction, it really builds their knowledge of what is required to write well. And there's a couple of examples of this in the toolkit. And back to the main page now, the final section with the literacy toolkit, the English. This is a section called Putting It All Together. And as I said, the same section you'll see in maths, in science, and the rest of it. And here we've been provided with a resource for the building knowledge part of the subject. We've been provided with information about now communicating and showing our understanding. What does it look like all together? What might it look like with all of that together? Head here to the English putting it together part. So let's have a quick look at this part. Here you've got, it really takes you through what reading and writing instruction could look like at the different stages of the learning cycle. So in here they've got engagement, building knowledge, what might the teaching unit look like? What might be the teaching practices at each of these? So I think it's really worth having a look at this section, even if these headings don't align with your school's instructional model for how you work. You can get a feel for what the unit looks like and what you'll be doing at the start when you're building their knowledge, what you'll be doing to get the students to demonstrate their understanding, and what are the literacy practices that come into play there. So there's also usually a sort of a lesson plan or a unit plan that you can download here to have a look at, and links to further resources. Well, there you have it. That is the English, the Secondary Toolkit English in a whirlwind tour. Okay, so you've got the intro. I like to think of it as the receptive, what's coming in, and then the communicating is the expressive, what's being sending out, and then put it all together. Bam. Okay, I've given you the whirlwind tour. I'm going to give you 3 minutes on the supporting resources pack that was emailed out, and there was also a link to this in the Padlet. I would like you to just reflect on the first column there. What did you learn? What was new for you? And what questions do you have just about disciplinary literacy and the toolkit that I've presented there? And I'm going to give you 3 minutes to reflect on that. And then we're coming back to talk about some teaching practices. Okay. I'd also like you to share some of your thinking in the chat. So what's your triangle response? Let's see some of your thinking in the chat. Is there a release date for the literacy and humanities classrooms?
Not a firm date yet. It's got with the Padlet. All of my comments have just been deleted.
Oh.
And I just added a new comment and it's been deleted.
Someone just asked that, but way back at the very first question that you asked. Oh.
Humanities is going to be released.
Okay, I can see some of you have started to put your thinking in the chat. I would love to know, what other questions do you have? Got the team from the department here tonight, so ask your questions, ask away in the chat, get them busy on their keyboards. What other thinking do you have around the toolkit? Thanks to everyone who's already shared your thoughts. Okay. Let's start talking about teaching practices in the English classroom. Right, so we've introduced the idea of the toolkit. We realise there's so much in there. How do we pick out what we need? And I think if you are tasked, if you're, say, the literacy leader in your school, this is something that you are going to really have to have your head around, so you know which part of it to direct specific teachers to. I think even for me going through the toolkit in preparation for tonight, it's already helped me in my work in leading literacy, because I can say, yes, I know it's on the toolkit, don't necessarily know where it is, but I know that it's on there. So then I can usually go to Google and look for it. So I've thought about, well, what are out of all of the things that are available on the toolkit, what are the really high impact things that secondary English teachers need to know about to implement, tomorrow in their classrooms? So that's why I've selected a couple of teaching practices to go into detail in tonight. And they're teaching practices that I think all English teachers, and in fact teachers of all disciplines, really should include in their practice, because these are the teaching practices that pay big dividends on student learning. Right, now that I've talked it up, let's go. So the practices that I'm referring to are situated in the Developing Understanding in English section of the toolkit. And I'm going specifically into that interpreting, analysing and evaluating text. So the text in context. Now, my old friend, the gradual release. So before I launch into talking about the teaching practices, I want to remind you of this framework, the one that I mentioned earlier. And that idea that we can't expect our students to engage in all of these literacy practices if we don't build their knowledge and skills, if we don't explicitly build their knowledge and skills to do so. So this framework, I think, is a really useful framework for evaluating our own practice, so that when we're looking at our students, we're getting frustrated saying, all the writing they did was so shallow, or they're not connecting with the texts. We can flip that on its head and say, okay, what's been my role in that? So what's the explicit teaching at the focus at the I do it stage? How have I built them, their skills and knowledge, to be able to be successful at writing texts with, richer and deeper writing pieces? So I really like this as a self-evaluation framework for teachers to think about what's been my role if the work that I'm getting isn't what I wanted. I've got to think about what role did I play in that first, and maybe I need to go back and do some more explicit teaching. Okay, so at the top here in the I do it, so the I do it is demonstrations and modelling. The we do it, the guided instruction, you'll see this on the video later on. It's when we pull a group of students together and we provide probably more targeted instruction to a group of students. That collaborative section, this is when we're so we might be working in pairs and practicing the strategy or the skill that we've modelled earlier. And then independent practice is when our students obviously go off and do it independently. I'm going to take you up to the I do it phase, because this is the part that I see missing in classrooms most often. And so the teaching practices that we're going to talk about here, think alouds and modelled reading or modelled writing. So I'm hoping that these aren't new to you, but I want to go through with you what these two things look like. So I've pulled this information from the toolkit. Now, the think alouds, this part here is actually from the primary toolkit, and I strongly recommend that all secondary teachers go and familiarise themselves with the primary toolkit for reading and writing and speaking and listening, because they have teaching practices on there and they explain what the teaching practices are. The teaching practices don't change. They're not dependent on how tall the kids are that are standing in front of you or sitting in front of you. Modelled writing is modelled writing irrespective of who you're working with. The same for modelled reading and think aloud. So I really recommend that you go to the primary toolkit and have a look at those teaching practices to get your head around it. This is really relevant, particularly if you're a Mylands teacher and you're thinking, all of a sudden I've got to learn how to teach kids how to read, when before they were reading to learn. Now I've got to go back and work out how do they learn to read. Head over to the primary toolkit and look at some of those teaching practices. So let's have a look. I obviously know there's a ton of words on this page. What are think alouds? Now these are, you get a lot of bang for your buck with the think aloud in any classroom. You don't have to buy a program. There's no expense in this. It is just you as the expert of the discipline showing students what's going on in your mind as you're reading and as you're writing. So I'll just read a part of this here. The Think Aloud strategy involves the articulation of thinking and has been identified as an effective instructional tool. I would definitely agree with that. Think Aloud protocols involve the teacher vocalizing the internal thinking that they employ when engaged in literacy practices or other areas of learning. The intention is that Think Alouds make transparent or overt the cognitive processes that literate people deploy. And the literate person in your room is you. And our students need to know, how does this proficient user of English, how do they think? What's going on in their mind when they're reading this text or when they're trying to create a text from scratch? So there's a lot of research that says the effective use of Think Aloud can positively impact student achievement. It's common for teachers to use Think Alouds when modelling, writing, reading, working out mathematical calculations. Oh, we can use this in other content areas. And for speaking and listening strategies. For maximum impact, this is the critical part, it is recommended Think Alouds are considered in the planning phase. So it's not necessarily something that I'm just going to start doing it, or not stopping you from doing that, but they're more effective when you're sitting down and planning, what's my lesson going to look like? I will do a Think Aloud. And these are the places in the book that I'm going to pause and think aloud, that type of thing. Students can use Think Alouds to monitor their comprehension, which can act as a form of assessment. So obviously, if our students are engaging in this idea of a Think Aloud, it's letting us know what's going on in their minds when they're reading and they're writing. And how else will we know that? So student Think Alouds can benefit the speaker, so the person actually engaging in the Think Aloud, as links between oral language, reading and writing are made while acting as a model for other students. So Think Aloud. Let's go and have a look at the next one, modelled reading. Okay, so modelled reading occurs in a whole class or small group situation. However, this approach is extended by incorporating Think Alouds. When I'm talking about modelled reading, we're talking about a proficient reader in the classroom modelling the reading. This is very different to we're reading a class novel. I need to catch everyone up so that we can just get through this thing so everyone's on chapter 5 by the end of the lesson. That's not modelled reading. That's not what we're talking about here. Modelled reading is I have a specific strategy or approach or focus that I'm going to demonstrate in front of the students, okay? And it is often teamed up with a Think Aloud to be more effective. So it's extending or incorporating Think Alouds where the teacher talks aloud their strategies to understand the content. Doing so allows teachers to embed other comprehension strategies into their reading so that students can experience what good readers do. So I've been really specific about what it is that we're modelling and why. What do I want the students in my class to understand about how a proficient reader interacts with this type of text, and how can I model that? Okay? So I'm hoping you can see the difference or what modelled reading is. And the same, we just flick that for writing. Modelled writing is when I'm demonstrating in front of the students what a proficient writer does. If I'm asking my students to write a persuasive text, they need to see me write one, right from the scratch. So, and I think I'll just say for a minute, particularly modelled writing is something that we don't do well in schools. And I was guilty of this. I was reflecting when I was teaching, I would go home, we'd be sitting around the kitchen table with my husband and my daughter, and we'd be saying, and I'd say, tomorrow I've got to do a lesson on persuasive writing and I've got to come up with a topic. Is anyone, what could I write about? What could I show the kids? And so at the kitchen table, we'd informally brainstorm some ideas, and then we think, oh yeah, that one. Yeah, I'll do that topic. What could I write about it? And so we, over dinner, would just brainstorm some ideas, and then I'd come into the classroom the next day and I'd say, right, I'm going to model writing, and I'd start writing my persuasive piece in front of the students. But what I realized is actually my students need to see that struggle from the night before. They need to see a proficient writer. How do they start from scratch? Because that's what I was going to ask my students to do. I wanted them to start from scratch. And what they had seen me model wasn't from scratch. It was, an hour into the thinking process. So when we're modeling, we've got to think about what's the skills or the strategies that I want my students to then replicate when they're independently writing. And for my lesson, I wanted them to start a persuasive piece from scratch, and they didn't see that when I modeled it. Okay, so you've got to be really thinking deeply about which part of the process do they model, and do your students get to see you creating texts in your classroom? Or is this, are they creating them themselves, going into that independent writing? So thinking about the gradual release, are they going into the I do it independently without having experienced anything else above that in the triangle? So on the toolkit, there are expandable sections to give examples of teaching practices in context. This is an example of the modelled reading in practice, the little, I think they're called accordions, the little expandable piece. So this one gives more information about what modelled reading would look like using a novel or an opinion piece. So from a newspaper, that is. So it's sort of almost like going into a virtual field trip. So you're not having to go and visit someone else's classroom, but you can kind of have a sneak peek at someone else's classroom by reading these extended examples. So I think they're really useful. So you can see how the teacher, they're reading the first third, and it steps you through what the teacher did. They did this first, then they did this, and they did this. And it helps to build your understanding of what actually is modelled reading. So I think that's a really useful example. And I see that someone said that the modelled videos on the primary toolkit are valuable, and I absolutely agree. That's why I'm saying go to the primary toolkit as well to see the resources they've got for modelled reading and modelled writing. And obviously you just need to adapt to the content, but just to get the idea of what's the teaching practice, go and have a look on there. So back to the gradual release of responsibility. We're using this to reflect. So when we're doing let's have a look, our think alouds and our modelled reading and writing, that's us at the top here in the I do it phase of the gradual release of responsibility. I will just add here, if you're interested in learning more about the gradual release, or you really want to get your head around each of these sections, Fisher and Fry's book, and I've got the reference down the bottom, so when you get a copy of the slides, it's called Better Learning Through Structured Teaching. It's got some really great details about what happens at each of the phases here. They're really strong on trying to communicate to people that the gradual release of responsibility doesn't need to exist in one lesson. So, it's not a lesson plan where you have to do this, then this, and this. But they do say that when you're introducing new content, the students need to be exposed to all 4 of these phases, not necessarily in order, but they do need to have the opportunity to work in all of the 4 phases across the learning. So don't try and, reshape your whole lesson plan based on this, but because it depends where you are in the unit. At the start of the unit, you might need to do more of the modelled, whereas you're sort of working towards more independent practice towards the end of the unit. So think with that in mind. So what I want to do now is we're going to have a look at this video, and I showed you this video. This was in the annotating text section of the toolkit. But I want you to watch this video, and I want you to consider that gradual release of responsibility. So where in this video can you see modelled practice? Where in this video, or think alouds, where can you see maybe guided instruction? Where can you see that partner work? Where can you see independent practice? Just to see what it could look like in a secondary classroom. So I will say also that you can download teaching notes for this specific unit that these ladies are talking about. That's all on the Literacy Teaching Toolkit as well. So have a watch and then share your thinking in the chat about where you can see the gradual release of responsibility existing across the unit of work that these ladies are introducing to their students.
So some of the things we're going to do today, we want to be able to predict and infer. We want to get our knowledge ready from what we've done already and be a vocabulary detective. With starting the new text, we want the students to sort of hook into what they're doing, so get their knowledge ready, what they know already, but also right from the beginning to start thinking about analysing the characters, the settings and the themes. So we want to make sure that they're thinking for themselves, and we want to be modelling the way to do it.
I was not used to getting up so early, but I struggled out of bed. Okay, struggled out of bed. So he is finding it difficult. Doesn't wake up like the others. He's not used to this routine.
Thinking Aloud's a new activity that one of our literacy coordinators brought back from Baustow, and it's a little bit similar to things we've done in the past, but it actually really does teach that metacognition where students are thinking aloud and you're encouraging them to ask questions of the text. You want them to be analysing at a very much a sentence level, a word level, thematic level, so that they're then able to do it for themselves later. And so we started by modelling and then putting them in pairs, so hopefully they will be able to do it for themselves.
A language barrier.
Okay, how can that be a challenge?
Well, you have to learn to communicate with.
When they write, they have these great ideas, but they need to be able to prove it with evidence from the text and sort of use those quotes and then read between the lines of what they actually mean. What's something that you think would tell us a little bit about his character?
That he's quite shy.
He seems shy, okay. So what proves that? We've got to prove that with evidence from the text.
At my old school, sometimes you just have to think to yourself, and I'd rarely get any ideas down because I'm quite a social person. So with this way, it's interesting, and you can point out things or add on to something someone else has said.
So now we want to write an informal text message. Now we haven't written a text message before. We've been writing more formal things like essays, whereas today we're actually going to write a text message. I think the text message activity was also a way just to engage them with the text. We're going to teach the difference between formal and informal language, and it's 50 words, it's short and sharp. We've done a bit of reading, so you want to balance it with a little bit of writing as well.
So you'd be like, I love you, or see you soon maybe, I don't know. Because you wouldn't, I guess you'd tell them that you wouldn't know what's really happening. So you could see them soon, or you might never see them again. You could keep in contact with them maybe. Yeah.
In Year 12 we know that we want them to write essays. They're not writing an essay this time, but we want them to be able to think of those, to be able to complete the skills that they're going to be using in those things. And really thinking aloud and being a critical thinker.
And I think for today as well, just really building that engagement with the text, because when they know they have to study it in detail and look at it, bit by bit, it puts them off
a little bit.
So we want them to enjoy the text, just because it's something that's on the text list that they have to study. We want them looking beyond that and actually getting a lot out of it.
I identify with that student in there because I too am a very social person, so I understand exactly what she's talking about. So if you can share your thinking in there, where did you see the evidence of the gradual release of responsibility? And one of the reasons that I wanted to share that video is to show you how you can use those videos in the toolkit for multiple purposes. So we could watch that video just to look at annotating text and the place of that in that unit of work. I've now used it to talk about gradual release and to pull it apart from that lens. We could go back in there and look at it for something else. So I just want you to be creative about how you could use the videos within the toolkit, because as you can see, there's some really great videos available to us, and more of them will be added as time goes on. Okay, just before I give you some time to reflect on your own teaching in relation to the teaching practices that I've discussed, I want to draw your attention to the Literacy Teaching Toolkit Primary. So before I was talking about the teaching practices, this is a screenshot showing you the teaching practices. So in primary for reading, we've got modelled reading, shared, guided, independent reading, and then reciprocal teaching, the language experience approach, lit circles, and close reading. So these are all absolutely valid for secondary teachers to get their heads around too. It just might be that you're changing the content, but the structure is still the same. So then if you go across to the writing resources in the primary, modelled writing, shared writing, interactive writing, guided writing. independent writing and language experience. So again, lots of resources on there. Okay. I see Victoria asked a question about the student-teacher ratio in the class. It is just, that was only a short video. It's not the whole entire class, which is one of the issues with people asking, watching videos from the toolkit, because often people will say, oh, we can't do that because they've only got this many people or they've got all these resources. So that's why I think when you watch a video with other staff members, you need to frame it up to say, this is what we're looking for in this video. So, and one of the reasons I will say, in the Leading Literacy program, we've just been going out and capturing some videos in some of the schools that we work with so we can use those in the course. It is incredibly difficult to film high quality videos in a classroom with all of the students in there. So for some of our videos, we've had to move some chairs and tables out so that we can increase the quality of the video and to not have it be overtaken by, you know, distractions in the background, because we want the people to focus on the practice and the talk. So I've definitely vouched for how difficult it is to create a video with everyone in the room. All right, 3 minutes to think about and reflect on the teaching practices and that idea of the gradual release of responsibility. So think about, what do you agree with, what's at the top of your mind, and what questions do you have? I'll give you 3 minutes. And again, I'd really like you to think of, to share your thinking in the chat. So 3 minutes. Okay. Thank you to all those people who've shared their thinking in the chat. And Gary, you can buy yourself a chocolate frog on the way home, because your comment, the video, although brief, demonstrates the importance of allowing students time to collaborate and share their ideas with peers, especially before completing tasks independently. Totally provides a segue to our next section. So you can buy yourself a chocolate frog on the way home. Well done, Gary. Here we go. We're going to talk about talk in the English classroom. It's only a short snippet. I personally believe this, if we're looking for a silver bullet in schools, this is it, talk. All right? It's not a program. So the talk resources, what are the resources available in the toolkit? In the developing understanding part, interacting with others, we've got book discussions, deconstructing speaking, all of those. In communicating understanding, we're talking about lit circles and Socratic dialogue. I'm going to go into the left-hand side, the book discussions, talk moves, exploratory talk, and look deeper at that. So on the toolkit, there are 2 parts to talk: student talk, teacher questioning, okay? So learning in English requires students to interact with others. That's not new. Identifying and sharing ideas and new knowledge, as well as listening purposefully, should be supported through carefully considered strategies. Now, talk is something that gradual release, we just throw that out the window because we assume that everyone can talk. Pull that gradual release back in. Let's go back to the top of that triangle. Have we explicitly taught our students how to engage in rich, deep discussion around texts? Just a question. Okay, so firstly, I want to highlight the fact that John Hattie's research, which everyone always likes to refer to, this demonstrates, I think we all know feedback. We've talked about feedback for a long time. John Hattie says feedback's really effective. So this is his updated list. I think he's got 252 influencers. This is just the top little photograph. We've been banging on about feedback for a long time now, but look way up the list there, classroom discussion. So feedback is down there at 0.70 effect size. Way up there at the top, 0.82. So a higher effect size than feedback is classroom discussion. We hardly ever talk about it. Right. I don't know why that is. I think it seems, I always refer to it as the poor cousin. So let's talk about the poor cousin. Firstly, why is classroom talk critical to teaching and learning? Now, the resource for this, I've put a reference in for this. Well, here's only 9 reasons, okay, that it's critical. It can reveal understandings. We can know what's going on in kids' heads, what they're thinking. It pushes students to put thoughts into words, and that helps them to clarify their thinking. And you saw that because the teachers provided those students with time to talk to another person before they went off independently. It can build confidence. It engages students in substantive classroom discussions that lifts intellectual dialogue. It supports robust learning. It supports deeper reasoning, scaffolds language. That is so critical, particularly if our classrooms have students with English additional language or emerging bilingual students. They need to practice talking to become better at it. And often those are the students in our classrooms who are doing the least amount of talk, okay? Talk nourishes the development of social skills, but we saw that girl on the video said she was already proficient in that area. Talk is the moment when the curriculum meets the students. And I think that was really evident in that video. Okay, for talk, I want to watch this short video from Carmen Cravola, and I want you to think about what is happening with talk in our classrooms, okay? So I've put some prompts there. When you watch this video, what is confirmed for you? What is new for you? What are your takeaways? And what are you thinking now about classroom talk in your own classroom and in the classroom of other people? And I'd like to see some of your thinking in the chat. All right, let's watch Carmen Cravola and see what she has to say about teacher talk.
Well, we go back and think about that work of John Hattie in the meta-analysis Visible Learning for Teachers, or Visible Learning. Both of those texts that Hattie has presented to us solid evidence about the importance of the teacher, solid evidence about the importance of instructional language. So if we went out from that most recent meta-analyses of the data and the literature, we know that we have that core that's something we're doing all day, every day, 2/3 of the time is the teacher talking. So in thinking about that, we need to be conscious of now raising the level of talk of the teacher, not increasing it, but raising the effectiveness of it, so that, in fact, it raises the effectiveness and powerfulness of the talk of the student. So we're going to be improving both the instructional language and the expressive or productive language of the student. There's a couple of things that I want to just highlight that are so regularly a part of our instructional language, which is actually debilitating the ability of the students to improve their language. One of the things is the wait time. It's such a simple thing. Teachers will always agree that wait time or pause time is important. But a quick analysis of the data and the literature shows that the mean wait time in a classroom is 2 seconds. 2 seconds from the first prompt. So we are very good at getting the right answer into the air as teachers. Courtney Kasdan, in her work Classroom Discourse, talks about the fact that teachers are expert at getting the right answer into the air. And most teachers know exactly what I mean when I say that to them. It means that we're always about that content knowledge. We're always about faster, quicker, and we're wanting to get to that end point. The skill in being an articulate teacher who allows students that time to explore and their own knowledge and their own understanding and their own reflections is now the teacher who actually has more pause time. Dr. John Hattie in his work will tell us that, you know, we need to reduce the amount of teacher talk in the classrooms. Well, I believe that if we work on the quality of the teacher talk,
Okay. I would like you to share in the chat what was confirmed for you, what was new, what are your takeaways, and what are you thinking now? I'm going to give you 2 minutes to share your thinking. That I reckon that's a really powerful video, and I'd love all teachers to watch it and have the opportunity to discuss. So I'm going to put the timer on and give you 2 minutes to share some of your thinking. I see some people had already put some ideas in the chat. And I see someone sent a link to the Oracy 21 project in the UK. Absolutely, strongly recommend everyone visit that site. I really like the resources available on there, and they include some talk moves as well. Just waiting for my tech team to put the audio back on. Okay, so if you can put your thinking in the chat, was your main takeaways? And what are you thinking now? I've put the timer on. We'll just have another minute for your thinking. Apologies for the audio. I'll sack the man in the tech box, everyone. So all I was asking you to do is just put your thinking in the chat, your reflection to that short video from Carmen Cravola. I'll give you 1 minute to do that. Okay. I think that's a video that we could absolutely share with most of our teachers to get them really thinking around what is the level of and the quality of teacher talk in the classrooms. And I really like that Carmen says it's not necessarily about doing less teacher talk, but it's about increasing the effectiveness of that talk. So on that, I want to introduce you to this concept of the initiate, respond, evaluate, IRE. And this is the most common pattern that is, and absolutely this is what I see in classrooms. So this is the pattern that Carmen referred to when she said that teachers are that we're good at getting the right answer into the air. So we have this idea in our head, and I think someone wrote this in the chat, and we're under stress, and so we throw the question out there and we just think, oh goodness, I hope one of these kids gets the answer that I've got. Good, let's move on. Okay, so that IRE is the default option that teachers return to in times of stress. They can encourage monologic teacher talk that severely limits student or learner talk, that in turn affects the amount and the quality of the learning by students. While there is nothing inherently wrong with this talk pattern, this isn't to say you should never ever engage in this IRE talk pattern. The feedback, or the third move, which is, so the I is the first move, the respond is the second move, the evaluate is the third move. So the feedback, the third move, often doesn't sustain or extend the thinking. So we want to get our kids to think deeper than saying, yes, that's the right answer, let's move on. It is, tell me more about that. What makes you think that? Does anyone else agree? Does anyone else have a different response? So this can be effective in some situations. It's a problem when it's the only talk pattern that teachers use in the classroom. The other thing that I'll highlight, and something that I see really often in classrooms, is at the very end there, Carmen talks about the amount of times the teacher restates what the student said or copies what they've said. It happens all the time. And it's another way, if we just stop parroting back what the kids have said to us, it is another way to reduce the amount of talk. Otherwise, every time we ask a question, we're talking twice to every once the students are responding. And you'll be horrified when you go back into your class tomorrow and you're thinking about this, you'll be horrified how often you do it. It's just something that we do without even realizing. So instead of just evaluating and saying good or whatever it is, in the toolkit, there are suggestions to reformulate feedback so that students are pressed to extend the thinking or to add more, provide more depth, more detail, present additional evidence, what makes you think that, to substantiate and to clarify the responses of other students. So there are resources in the toolkit that you can go to say, if I'm working on changing the third talk turn, what other things could I say instead of, yep, that was right, let's move on. So there are also sentence stems provided in the toolkit. So this is when we're talking about if we want to build the depth and the robustness of our student conversations, we've got to explicitly teach them the sentences that, how might you start that? I noticed, I wondered, I felt, I made a connection. We can't assume that our students come to our class knowing the talk moves and knowing, even a really good example is we assume that our students know how to disagree respectfully. This is a skill they're absolutely going to need out in the wide world. Have we explicitly taught them skills to disagree respectfully on a topic or on an opinion? It's a wondering. Think about it. Have we provided sentence stems to start? How do you disagree respectfully? What are the different ways that you might do that? Have we given them time to practice in a safe environment how to disagree respectfully? Some of our world leaders could come into our lessons for that. All right, I am going to skip over the reflection time because I am conscious of the time and I want you to, I just want to provide you with access to the resources for further learning. So firstly, I'll say these 3 books, if you're a literacy leader and you're looking at implementing or assisting other teachers in discipline areas to increase or improve the literacy that they're teaching, this is disciplinary literacy is your first point of call. Your second point I put these out of order just to keep things, exciting. The second book I would get is Adolescent Literacy in the Academic Disciplines, and they've got some really good thinking in there to build your content knowledge around each of the disciplines. And then When you're looking at a whole school literacy culture, that's when you go to the book in the middle. And remember, you'll have access to these on the slides. And before we go back to the learning intentions and success criteria, I want to draw your attention to a couple of professional learning opportunities that are upcoming at Basto. First one, if you're a literacy leader in your school, so if it's your job to spread the literacy knowledge throughout the school and across disciplines, there are area workshops coming up. You can see the dates there. Intakes start 17th of April. Hot off the press, so hot I've had to bring my laptop up the front here so I can read them to you. Session 1 on the day will be looking at a whole school literacy culture. Session 2 on that day will be identifying the features of content literacy and disciplinary literacy. What teachers do to teach how experts read, write, think, and engage in dialogue differently in each discipline. And session 3, leading a whole school literacy culture. So looking at how do you build the capacity of others and reflecting on literacy in your school and identifying next steps. So that's what's being covered in that one-day secondary literacy leader area workshops. If you're interested in that, head to the Basto website to sign up. The other opportunity that's available now, registrations close 9th of April, the Literacy Data Assessment Practice fully online course, secondary focus. So in here, it's a strong focus on formative assessment and pedagogy's reading, writing, vocab. This is not a number crunching PD. So you're absolutely, if you think you're going there to learn how to analyse NAPLAN or crunch numbers, that is not what that course is about. It is about really deeply getting to know the learners in your class as readers, writers, vocabularians. So if you're interested in that, it's fully online. They have a webinar once in each module. So I think there are 6 modules for that. So the intakes start at the end of April and registrations close the 9th of April. Again, head to the Basto website for that. But that was really well received last year by the secondary teachers who did it. That's specifically a secondary course. Okay, go back to the understanding goals. I'm going to go to the success criteria. I'm hoping that you can describe reasons why explicit teaching of disciplinary literacy is important. You can list some practical literacy related activities, reflect on your own practice, and know where to go for further resources. The final thing I'll ask you to do tonight is to fill out this survey, and we'll put the link in the chat for this as well. Just done it. So this is a QR code just to give us some feedback. We want to know what's useful. What do you want more information about? We need to know what resources you need and what support you need to be able to implement these resources. So the next webinar we're looking at is maths. So if you have any colleagues in the maths discipline, let them know the dates coming up. It's in a couple of weeks. All the information's on the Basto website. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, everyone. Hopefully it's been useful, and I might see you again in one of the other webinars. But good luck in looking at the toolkit, and hopefully it's useful. Good night.